Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is Refuge from Narcissism, and this refugee video is sponsored by contribution from Tanya, and it's the same Tanya again, with I'm sure another update about her borderline psychopath bitch of a mother. And here's her story. Hi, Ollie. Tanya here again. I've been trying to draft this letter for a couple days, and each time I get off topic and start writing about my family when the topic is about my new boss at work. Okay, so it's the new boss at work. I took a break and watched a clip on YouTube of one of my favorite comedians, Tim Dillon. This clip is titled Tim Dillon on the theater kid energy plaguing comedy. Another theater kid who is not plaguing comedy, but the corporate world, is the senior management in my department. Disclaimer, I have nothing against theater kids. This just fits the archetype of the senior manager and how his background influences and decisions, how his background influences his decisions in the corporate world. I worked for a defense contractor with a lot of former military staff. For more than 10 years, I worked in a finance role. I was looking for a change since finance culture expects a lot of overtime with little reward. Working 60-plus hours on a regular basis with no improvement in sight, I set out to find another role, specifically outside of finance. I liked my company, and having worked in several other companies, I didn't want to start a new job where I was unsure what the corporate culture was like. So I found a new job in the front end of the business. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I had to take a chance and see what else was out there. Me and my coworkers were burnt out in finance, and I didn't want to spend another year working for workaholics. Workaholics build weapons that kill people. I didn't know you worked with, I'm not shitting on you for it, okay? But I already know the type of people you must be working for. The interview for this new role in the front end of the business went well. I interviewed pretty well and for the most part get job offers. I interviewed with the hiring manager for the new role. He seemed to swing from nice guy one moment to skeptic in the next moment in a span of 30 minutes. I thought he was sketch. Thankfully, he quit soon after I started, so I had a nice boss who I will call Ben. Then there was the interview with the HR person, which was just a formality. She really didn't care what I said. Next was a panel interview with 3 people who ended up being my direct co-workers. So you got to interview with your co-workers? Let's defend. Like, they want to make sure, they probably want to make sure of everything. Like, this went well since they liked my background with data, databases, and advanced Excel skill set. The final interview was with the senior manager who was in charge of the department I would be entering. He managed roughly 50 people, or should I say he managed the middle managers who were responsible for the various functional areas in this large organization. My interview with the senior manager ran long. It was supposed to be 30 minutes, but lasted 1 hour. Right away, I sensed he was Mr. Positive and didn't like negative people. So I presented myself as amiable as possible. He was a talker, so I was in his audience of how great he was and the vision he had for the department. I was interviewing for 2 jobs at the time in 2 different finance departments. I got offers for both and chose the front-end job I described above. The other job was related to operations, and I spent more than 10 years supporting the manufacturing plant in my finance role, and I really wanted to change. So I accepted the job offer from the front end of the business. I was always operations. I could never do front-end stuff. My move was easy since I moved from one end of the building to the opposite end of the building. My first day, my coworker set up a training plan and my new teammates were organized. I also heard an earful about the executive senior manager reported to and how destructive she was. For continuity, I will give the senior manager the name Steve and the executive he reported to as Rachel. The first day in my new role, I heard about how Rachel joined the company 18 months ago, and she set out to change the relaxed, fun corporate culture in this department. From the get-go, Rachel hinted her new administrative assistant that she expected her to be the eyes and ears of the organization and report back to Rachel. Yep, she's already setting up her little high school lunch table. Already setting up her little high school cabal. The assistant was uncomfortable with this and refused to rat on her colleagues she worked with for 15 years. The Mr. Positive Steve and Rachel were very close. I learned later Rachel was Steve's mentor at work via a mentorship program. I also learned that when Rachel was promoted, she appointed Steve. Much like an undemocratic system of making political appointments, Rachel utilized a loophole in the HR process of appointing people to various roles instead of following the traditional hiring process of formally posting the position and interviewing candidates. In her short time with the company, Rachel quickly created a team of appointees who were all loyal to her. Any detractors to her new cutthroat regime were quickly weeded out, either through firing or quitting because they could not stand her management style. As an outsider joining just after the fallout, I was spared from having to interface with Rachel since she had just been promoted. She had convinced senior management to keep our department under her new organization. I would later learn she would farm out various talented people from my department and use them as free labor to make herself look good in her new role. She was ruthless but smart. She also had a short buzz haircut and had a wife. She tried to convey male energy, and her height and dress pants helped facilitate her goal to look authoritative. I felt she was trying to overcompensate because she was female. She would actually look quite feminine. She actually would look quite feminine had it not been for the buzz haircut. Her voice was a regular woman's voice, very feminine actually. When I watched the documentary on Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos, I immediately thought of Rachel. The same charm and bullshit vibe, the same cutthroat behavior. Yeah, anybody who don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is, she totally scammed as the founder of the CEO of this company, Theranos. It was all bullshit. It was all bullshit. She cost the stock market like billions of dollars. Like, just a total fraud. Total fraud. Learning all this information, I tried to stay under the radar and do my job without drawing attention to myself. During the next 2 years, I seemed to be doing a good job, and I was shielded from Steve since I reported to one of the middle managers. Despite Rachel being in another role, Steve would often seek her counsel. She still controlled our department. I now had a work-life balance and was working 40 hours and no more overtime. I had good ideas and all of them were embraced. Somehow, because Rachel liked me behind the scenes, I was safe from Steve. If Rachel liked me, Steve liked me. If Rachel liked me, Steve liked me. I even got to travel in my new role and was lucky enough to visit London in 2019. All this time, I knew I could not hide forever. I knew Steve would one day seek me out, but I didn't know how or when. Then March 2020 came, shutdown started. We all started working remotely. By May 2020, I decided I was going no contact with my family. I also decided I was relocating at this time so I would not fail no contact as I had 5 years earlier. I approached my boss, I will call him Ben. I told Ben I was planning on relocating and if he was open to keeping my job and working remotely out of state. Ben ran it by Steve and Steve ran it by Rachel. We were all on board and I got approval. I ended up moving by late November 2020. My transition to relocating and working remotely was seamless. In my personal life, I was silently dealing with the fact that I had just went no contact. This did not impact my work. In February 2021, my boss, Ben, scheduled a quick meeting with his team. He announced there would be a reorg in the department. He told us he was taking a new management position. Based on the reorg, everyone had a new manager except me and my coworker Jen. Her and I had specific roles that supported the functional areas of the 50 people in the department. Ben told me and Jen that Steve was working on a replacement rec for his job. Ben said me and Jen would report to Steve on a temporary basis. By this time, I knew how Steve operated, and I had the realization I could no longer hide and have a shield like I did with Ben. Individually, Ben warned me and Jen about Steve and his management style. I learned this when Jen and I exchanged notes later. Ben told me and Jen to be prepared since Steve was going to ask us personal questions and would expect a lot from us. Ben and I had a good relationship. He trusted me and knew I would get the job done, despite it being very demanding. Ben's parting words to me were, "You never let me down." Before any of this happened, I had observed some odd behavior from Steve in 2018 and 2019. I like giving people nicknames, and I had been calling Steve the Woman. This was because he behaved like one. He reminded me of all the prior female managers I had who were in my personal business and got easily offended. Steve is married to a woman and has no kids. He has 2 dogs, and that seems to keep on he has 2 dogs that he seems to keep on a tight leash. I observed that Steve was controlling. I did not know what his background was. However, he seemed to conflict with the culture of the department. Most of the staff were former military. The cubicles were decorated with various inside jokes and figurines. This caused Steve great offense, and he would regularly spy on employees after hours by walking into each cubicle and examining any item he deemed offensive. He felt he had this right since HR was cracking down and was led by the woke liberal commies. Here we go. This is a defense contractor, by the way. Do you wonder why? What's going on? It's going on. This is what... Married, no kids, 2 dogs. Working with Rachel, his mentor, does everything she says. Makes sense. Sometimes I would work after hours and I would catch Steven popping in and out of the cubicles. I probably caught him 3 times. I would say hello to him and he would pretend not to see me and continue his audit. Then my turn came. I was in this new role for 8 to 10 months at that point. At one of the team meetings, one of the female functional managers threw me under the bus. I was upset, and my new coworkers, who I got along with, comforted me afterwards and told me she did that regularly to people. Since the culture before Rachel and Steve joined was fun and lighthearted, some people were unwilling to give in to the politically correct purge that was happening. After that meeting, my coworker Carol gave me a figurine that had been gifted to her by one of the guys at work. This was meant to be a joke of being thrown under the bus. Carol and Jen got together and thought it would be fun to leave it on my desk to make me feel better. When I got to my desk, I saw it sitting there on the keyboard. It was a yellow school bus toy with Woody from Toy Story super glued underneath the bus, meaning he was being thrown under the bus. I was so happy to have such fun coworkers since the people in finance were no fun. Before this, I had given the department a nickname of Big Brother. Everyone whispered and looked over their shoulders. This reminded me of how my grandparents behaved and whispered since the KGB, the secret police, were always spying on citizens in communist Ukraine. Out of the 50 people sitting in the cubicles, there was one rat who would run to Rachel if he overheard something compromising. I never gave him a nickname, but he looks like Brian Stelter from CNN, just as annoying too. People learned to whisper when Brian was near. One time I was sitting at my desk working and I had a plaque that reflected. I saw someone peek into my cube from behind me through this reflection. I ran out of my cube to see who it was, and it was Steve. I saw his backside and quickly walked away and turned the corner. Later, I asked Steve if he needed anything. He asked why. I said I thought he had walked by earlier. He denied it. So a couple days after I was loaned Woody and the school bus, it was still proudly displayed on my desk. Then suddenly Steve had a question. He walked into my cube and I was answering this question. I had to be almost robotic and pleasant to placate him. Then I saw it. Steve's head slowly turned to the left and his eyes became fixated on Woody. His eyes widened and asked, "What is this?" "None of your business." "Woody under a bus? What do you care? Is it a phantom? It's mine. That's what it is. None of your business." I tried to brush it off and say it was a joke. His eyes were still fixated on it and still wide. He had the look of disapproval. He asked, "Did somebody give that to you?" I replied, "Yeah, it was meant to be funny." He asked, "Someone from our go away. None of your business." "Oh, what a woman. What a fucking woman, you jealous bitch." He was getting more unraveled with each question. I replied, "Yes," and his eyes got wider and wider. "Someone from our department?" I wish I lied and said no, but I said yes, and he asked who. I refused to give him the name, and he said it was meant to be funny. Then he proceeded to tell me that this might be perceived as offensive, and he was wondering if it was appropriate. I just nodded. Then he raised his eyebrows in disapproval and walked away. I was like, oh shit, now I'm on his radar. How can a grown man not take a joke? It was funny. How does he consider that offensive? I thought to myself. Since I work at the defense contractor, we're not allowed to display any visible proprietary company information at our desks. I had heard of these audits conducted by security, but never had been selected in the 6 years I was with the company. The next day after Woodygate with Steve, I arrived at work and saw a piece of paper laying on my keyboard. It was from security. I had been written up by them for displaying proprietary information at my desk. I had hidden Woody before this since I knew Steve would be back from war. So I looked through my clean and organized cubicle to find out why I got written up. In the far corner, I found a commercial pricing list. In small letters was listed proprietary. I have to mention that Steve was buddies with the head of security. So the fact that I got a random security audit the day after he saw Woody was no coincidence. I immediately went to Carol and told her what happened. She rolled her eyes and took Woody back. She proudly displayed it on her desk and dared Steve to challenge her since she had been with the company for 30 years. Carol is a no-nonsense Italian who does not let bullies like Steve intimidate her. I think Steve stayed clear of Carol probably because he was afraid of her. Also, Steve was a bit of a snob. He looked down on the former military staff and rarely acknowledged them. When I was 6 months into the job, I was standing in the hallway talking with a couple of my coworkers. Suddenly, Steve approached us with a fake smile and asked us what we were talking about. Since I was a small child, I learned to change the subject quickly and had to do this with my borderline mom. So I lied on the fly, and Steve awkwardly stood there with the three of us trying to insert himself in the conversation. After he left, my coworkers told me he never approached them and ignored them. After they thought he only approached us because I was standing there. More weird observations were made. In meetings, my coworkers noticed Steve would stare at me. They concluded Steve was obsessed with me. I didn't want any of this attention and made myself scarce. Fast forward to February 2020. I learned from Per10d that Steve would be my temporary manager. In March 2021, Steve set up a Zoom call on our first one-on-one. I was nervous since I knew talking with him was like walking on eggshells. By this time, Rachel took a big promotion and left the company, so Steve was the head honcho. The Zoom call was scheduled for 1 hour but lasted an hour and a half. I got on the call and was sitting in his home office. It was the first time we were face to face in a long time. We made small talk and he asked me how everything was going. I made the mistake of telling him I didn't know the reorg was happening and tried to give Ben a compliment and told Steve I would miss having Ben as my manager and I thought he was a great guy. Right away, Steve took offense to this and concluded I was comparing Steve to Ben, that I was implying Steve was not a great guy. Jesus Christ, when you're this is like working for a chick on her period. Nothing is worse than a man on his period. Than a woman in a man's body on their period. When, ugh. Just stick a tampon in it. You want to tell him, you know, plug that shit up, dude. Walk it off. He made a face and was acting like a jealous boyfriend. It was super uncomfortable. I then had to explain to Steve that Ben explained to me reporting to Steve was very temporary and that they were going to find somebody quickly to replace Ben so me and Jen would get a new boss. Then Steve told me things had changed, that HR was approving one job rec, but Ben's rec was up in the air and that HR had not approved it yet. He implied I would be reporting to him for a while, which I think is for the next 12 months or so. This was news to me, and I was devastated despite showing him a pleasant face on Zoom. Knowing how much Steve likes to talk, I asked him questions about various topics so that the attention would not be on me. For the next hour, it was self-promotion about how great he is and how his ideas are forward-thinking and what a hero he is for promoting these ideas to senior management. He also asked me personal questions about my move, if I knew anyone in the new city I moved to. When I said no, Steve's eyes widened and as if acting surprised, as if I said something embarrassing. Ben warned me Steve would pry. Additionally, during this call, as Steve was talking himself up, there were 3 times when I thought he was making a joke or being sarcastic. In each instance, I giggled and laughed, thinking he was trying to be funny. Each time he interjected and asked me, "Why are you laughing?" By the end of the call, I had to explain I was laughing with him, not at him. Jesus Christ, dude, take a Midol. We concluded the call with him telling me we would have a one-on-one once a month going forward. After the call wrapped and I had a few days to think about it, I called Jen and asked her how her one-on-one was, and she said it was awkward as always. In previous years, Steve always singled Jen out behind the scenes and made the middle manager counsel Jen for not being positive enough at work. I relayed to Jen how awkward my one-on-one was and got the feeling he didn't like losing control of me working remotely out of state. I couldn't prove it, but I sensed it was based on some of his questioning. The next one-on-one was in mid-April 2021. This one was scheduled for 1 hour but lasted 2 hours. This was even worse than the first one, as a female, I always pride myself in my appearance. When my Zoom call is scheduled, I make sure to wear makeup, style my hair, put on an outfit. Otherwise, I'm working makeup free with my hair in a bun and wearing sweats. So during the Zoom call, I saw my reflection on the call. I thought to myself, that I looked super presentable. This is something I always made time for in my routine, whether for Zoom calls or grocery shopping. I remember when I was 16 years old, my mom forced me and my siblings out of bed one Saturday morning. We were forced to get dressed and drive to the local Ukrainian credit union to get our passport pictures taken and apply for a passport. The credit union was facilitating this one-day event, and many Ukrainian families were taking advantage of it. I was given no notice and was made to wake up at 7 or 8 a.m. and told to get dressed. I have fine hair and need to wash it every day because it gets greasy and plastered to my head. My passport picture looked like a mugshot. I had no makeup, my hair was pulled back, and I had a resting bitch face because I was not allowed to smile for the picture. For the next 10 years, I was forced to walk around with this embarrassing picture. During the one-on-one, Steve decided to tell me that one of my former colleagues gave me a compliment. She said, see Tanya, she's my favorite kind of people, meaning I had the same work ethic and style and this very respected finance person. This comment was made because I had yet again performed well on a project and it got noticed from various departments. I think Steve had often encountered people who knew me and they had nothing but good things to say. As the covert narcissist that he is, he had to take me down a peg. He was number one after all. So Steve did just that. After sharing this compliment with me, Steve then had to tell me that he wanted to talk about a teachable moment. I thought to myself, here we go. I knew he had something planned. Instead of getting to the point, he asked me questions like, what do you think your communication style is? He didn't know what he was going to talk to you about, to be honest. He didn't know what, so now he's going to try to interrogate you. What do you think your communication style is? Not knowing where he was going with this, I repeated how others had described me as honest and authentic. Then he said, since you claim to have authenticity, tell me what you think of the meetings that you run bi-weekly. Knowing this was a trap, I gave an answer to try to placate him. I had been running these meetings for 2.5 years. In this time, I had exhausted all the technical improvements that could be made to this tool. The only thing left to criticize for him was the results and how I reported them. Steve then said, you seem disinterested in the topic. You treat the meeting like it is beneath you, and you are quick to wrap up the call once the results are presented. Yeah, dude, because we aren't chicks sitting around doing our fucking hair and nails. Well, you want gossip time? What do you want? You didn't say it happily enough. Go away. Go away. It's like when I used to hear at Macy's, you don't smile enough. You want to smile? Go hire a fucking clown. Go hire a clown to do this. I was taken aback, but had to continue to be amiable. I told him I gave time at the end for questions. However, it often led to a long, awkward pause with no one saying anything. So at that stage, I would conclude the call and tell everyone I would see them next time. He then proceeds to tell me in a dramatic way, I barely had time to unmute myself before I knew it, you hung up. You hung up the call. I told him presenting has never been one of my natural skill sets, and that's why I do so much prep work ahead of the meeting. I listed all the things I did to prepare, which he seemed fine with. But he was not done. He told me, we will work on your communication style. I thought to myself, if you had a problem with how I ran the meeting, you could have told me about it 2 years ago. Then Steve then proceeds to list my former boss, Ben, as an example. He said, if you met Ben 5 years ago, he was so cold, but I changed him. I worked on him. He then implied he would change me. The last time I checked, I didn't know I needed a personality change. This was something that fucking incensed me. That I had to get in somebody. I had to get in one of these trainers' faces, because it was like the third or fourth time she came up to me and asked me if everything was okay. Like, are you like? It's like, I'm like, I finally had to turn her. I'm like, I just don't like you. Like, I just don't like you. And I knew her boss, who was a senior vice president, Marianne Cadmus, because she came out of our division before she went into events plan, whatever. I can't remember what it was, like advertised planning or whatever it was, and they were trying to train these people. And she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? She's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, this is the fourth time she's come up to me, Marianne. Okay, about and she's just, because I don't smile, and I don't smile. And I'm like, and my problem is like, she's clueless of how she comes off herself. And she's like, what? And I have to say, I'm like, can I ask you a personal question? She's like, what? I'm like, you don't have children, do you? She's like, no. She's like, well, what does that have to do anything? I'm like, because you talk to everybody in the same tone that my daughter's preschool teachers talk to the preschoolers. You talk to everybody like they're children. Like their children, like you're talking to a preschool class. This is when this happened, because it's the example. This is how long ago this was. I'm like, I've been with this company now, what, 13, 14 years? This is who I am, okay? I can know, if I came up to you and said, hey, I don't like you being fat, I don't think you'd like that very much, would you? And she wasn't fat, so that's why I was able to say it. And it got to the point where HR finally had to get involved. Like, we really shouldn't be telling people to smile more, because people are who they are. Now I'm suddenly working for Steve, and I need to be converted according to what he thinks is an appropriate communication style. Steve then proceeds to tell me how he loves psychology and he wants to know what makes people tick. As he is talking, I'm thinking in my head all the red flags going off. During this call, I felt forced to include an example of my presentation skills and how I also deal with my personal life. I am a singer, but I also have stage fright. Later in the call, Steve then spoke about his lengthy experience in theater, film editing, and film production. He explained, that's somebody I want working in as a defense contractor, somebody in theater who can act. Film editing and film production. That's frightening. These are the sociopaths building weapons, people. He explained he had to quit the film industry since the work was inconsistent. No, he quit the film industry because the real money is in weapons. That's why he quit the film industry. This revelation allowed me to understand how this theater guy, Steve, was exerting his authority on these very masculine former military guys. I had no idea he had this background, and he told me he only told me this because I had told him I was a singer. He kept apologizing for keeping me an hour over. Later that evening, I took a long walk and was trying to convince myself I would be okay. I can handle this. The next day was Friday. I had one meeting scheduled that was a non-Zoom conference at 9 a.m. At 8:30 a.m., Steve sends me an instant message at work. He says, "Good morning, Tanya. Do you have 5 minutes to chat?" I said, "Hello, yes, I have a 9 a.m. meeting." I thought to myself, didn't we talk enough yesterday? The instant message tool at work has the functionality to call your computer, even present your screen. In the years I have used this tool, everyone has always clicked on the call button. Since the instant message was open, all Steve had to do was click on the call button to speak with me. No, because he doesn't want it monitored by the company, probably. As soon as I said, Yes, he automatically sent me a link to a Zoom call. I was frozen. Is he really doing this? Zoom calls are never supposed to be a surprise. That is why most conference calls are set up with instant message feature in order to do conference calls only. Since working remotely, why don't you just set up a Discord? Like, even instant message, like, you should have all these companies, everybody's moving to Discord now. Because you could video conference, you can video share, you can do whatever you want. No feedback, no nothing. I may even set up a Discord. Zoom calls are never supposed to be a surprise. That is why most conference calls are set up with the instant message feature in order to do conference calls only. Since working remotely, I had never had someone send me a surprise Zoom call. Zoom also tells you when you're recording, when somebody's recording as well, like from your computer. But here he was. I automatically knew what he was doing. He wanted to catch me off guard to see what I looked like without notice. He was right. I was in sweats, no makeup. My hair looked like crap. I desperately tried to put 2 blocks under the laptop as I had done the day before so that the camera would be facing me straight on. I knew this was his plan to catch me off guard, to prove that I was in fact working remotely or not, to prove that I was in the same location that he had seen me in yesterday. He did not tell me what he wanted to talk about. So when the Zoom call started, he seemed really pleased with himself that I looked like crap. I was embarrassed. I think he wanted to embarrass me. He wanted to start that narrative of, I got on a call with Tanya and she looked rough. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. Then he started acting and asked me a very non-consequential question that could have been delivered in email or instant message. I was not surprised at the lack of priority or significance in his question. I knew his goal was to catch me off guard. The only thing he wanted was to embarrass me because I looked beautiful the day before and now I looked unkempt. You're working for a woman in a man's body on his period. I mean, that's what you're dealing with here. And he might actually still have a crush on you. He might have a thing for you at the same time. After the call with Steve, I got a call from Jen from my personal number. Her and I were both on the 9 a.m. call, so we only had 10 minutes to speak. I told Jen how Steve did a surprise Zoom call, and she automatically said it's because he doesn't like you working out of state. Then I told her how he told me the bi-weekly meetings I run are shit. Jen is in those meetings and reinforced I am always prepared and present well. I got on the 9 a.m. call and Steve does not attend those. The room was still spinning. The night before I was trying to convince myself I can handle working for Steve, but the surprise Zoom call was deliberate. I had been down this road in my 20s with a female boss who set out to try to destroy me. No matter how well I did, I was always set up and sabotaged. Much like my mom. I know how this ends. I'm not going to be a sitting duck hoping things get better. They never do. Once the narcissist has their teeth in you, it only ends badly. So I was still in a panic on that Friday morning and thought, what do I do? So I started looking for internal jobs. I already planned to look for a promotion next year. I had been making lateral moves and not received a promotion in a while. Steve's surprise Zoom call accelerated this plan. I found a job I wanted to apply for. I remember in a prior job when I tried to escape a controlling boss, I applied to a job and internally behind their backs. They found out and held it over my head. They used it against me and kept me in the department for 2 years longer than I wanted to stay. So I drafted an email to Steve. I made it short and to the point. I told him I intended to discuss career advancement with him on the one-on-one and would be pursuing it. He sent me an email back and told me to set up a Zoom call, that he was happy to support me in this. I doubted. I needed to make a move and to let him know I would not be stuck under his thumb. I will not be his next project. I will not join the Borg and become part of the collective. There is a risk he might sabotage this internal move. However, I knew that before I sent him that email, this job is in a different division, and I just had my performance review in February. So I have a window of time where Steve can't punish me formally in the near term. What I realized with both my family and narcissistic bosses was that I'm frozen in fear. I stayed hoping things would get better. I people pleased only to be taken advantage of and become a doormat. Most of all, I allowed them to control me by staying. I've seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well. I refuse to be another sacrifice for another self-professed narcissistic god. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, and in the industry he's in, with his background he comes from, the guy's a ticking time bomb. If you stay in that division, yeah, it's gonna end badly. And for the timing you have right now that you wrote me this back in, it wasn't too long ago, mid-April. So, okay, I hope you're moving forward. I have talked to you since then. So I hope you're moving forward with this. Understand what you're working for. You had him pegged right, the woman. He's a woman in a man's body, constantly on his period. His period never ends, okay? They are always riding the rag. Always. The woman in the man's body, okay, and what he is a borderline, is always on their period. Always on their period. And you sure as hell don't want to marry him, and you don't want to work for him. You don't want him in control of your career. So, I hope this is all already this process is well in the works. So, I hope that helps. Thank you, Tanya, for another contribution and story. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, something you'd like me to expose, you'd like to set up a Skype, phone call, have a private video made, you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or you'd just like to make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all of this goes away, as this channel is completely demonetized by Google and YouTube. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been Refuge from Narcissism. Take care.